we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time listening, welcome. If it's not, welcome back. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome as well. Hey, how are you? Remember, hit that bell, hit the notifications if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel, do all that fun stuff. Spread the word, tell your friends to do the same. If you guys ever want to reach out to the podcast, check us out. DM us on our Instagram at the Bigmark Podcast, at the Bigmark Pod on Twitter as well. And you can also support the podcast. Check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Another solo episode this week, and we're getting into an episode and a topic that I'm really, really excited about. You know, it's one of those things that I don't know. I don't want to say necessarily put it off, but it's based on a documentary series that has 6 episodes, and each episode's an hour. So it takes a while to watch this friggin' thing. And you know, I didn't want to rush it. I didn't want to do it, but it's a really interesting documentary series. I've loved it. I've always been really interested in it. I've always told people about it and you know, watched it and rewatched it. And it's called Wild Wild Country. It's a really interesting documentary. Came out in 2017 on Netflix, and just tremendous, deep, engrossing story. So many facets, and it's going to get deep today, and it's going to get deep, and only because the questions raised in this scenario, which I'll get into, of course, is you have differences in opinion, you have differences in like constitutional rights and fairness and ethics and equity and equality and all that stuff, and it's like it's a very interesting story to kind of look at it from either side. And I think it's really important in life and doing everything is to kind of step back, either put yourselves in other people's shoes, or at least step back in a sense that you can look at a situation, you can judge it, you can see both sides and try and understand both sides. And this is kind of one of those scenarios where it's polarizing, I guess, in a sense, but there's moments anyway in the documentary where I know I felt one way, and then all of a sudden you're pulled one way or another, and that's for the filmmakers of the documentary. Like, that's tremendous. I'm not going to go so much into the nitty gritty of how the film was made. I'm kind of more interested in the actual story, and the story is about the Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. He's our central character. And he started this commune in India, and he basically created. It's tough to use the word religion, but essentially he created a religion called Rajneeshi, or called. They were called the Rajneeshi. They wore all red. They had many different tenets. I'll kind of get into it a little bit more. The most interesting thing about the whole thing is that the whole situation actually leads to the largest wiretapping and largest poisoning case in the U.S. history at that point. And again, how we even get from where I started to there is amazing. So we'll kind of go through things here slowly but surely. So again, our central player here, the Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, he was born December 1931, and he died in January 1990. He had a master's in philosophy. He was born in India, and his contemporaries essentially said, and I didn't want to go too much into the history of him individually just because we only have so much time, but he ended up becoming essentially a holy man, and his contemporaries said if this man lives long, he will be the next Buddha. So interesting. Obviously, we know, he was 58 when he passed away, so he's pretty young. So I wouldn't say that's long, and I don't understand how the I think it's like the Dalai Lama, I guess, is the is the incarnation of Buddha on Earth. Anyway, it obviously didn't happen. And he started the Rajneeshi cult, essentially. I guess we'll call it a cult instead of a religion, but oh well. He started in 1972. It was a worldwide movement, noted an affirmation of life, playful and joyful, and based on science rather than belief and dogma. Which, as the episode goes on, it kind of raises some questions there. That's for sure. It still exists. The practitioners of the Rajneeshi, you can call them sannyasins, and there's about 1 million still worldwide. Well, actually, that was from 2013, but there was 1 million sannyasins worldwide in 2013. So that was before the documentary ever came out. And again, the central teachings, they're essentially materialist spiritualists. So Bhagwan tried to kind of marry those two things, that the whole idea of, renounce your possessions and renounce your whole thing, and no sex and and chastity and all that kind of thing, and all those like poverty, all those vows of like, removing things and taking and depriving yourselves of things. He wanted to get away from that. He didn't want to have anything to do with that part of organized religion, and he kind of wanted to start his own thing and kind of merge the idea that you can still have things and want things in life and experience pleasure. And that in itself is part of the route to the divine, I guess. Again, you could say it was an anti-organized religion, but it's a little hypocritical in my opinion. Like, you're still organized together, so I don't know. I mean, again, going against the dogmas is great, but saying that you're against organized religion is interesting. Again, the main preachings were, preaching creativity, sexuality, passion. The Bhagwan really believed that bringing new things into existence through creation would really help fulfill yourself, which is interesting. And again, they don't repress sex like any other religion. And they also practice something called dynamic meditation, which is basically a combination of Hinduism and psychotherapies, as they explain it. And there's 4 stages. So the first stage is chaotic breathing. Essentially, it's like hyperventilating, kind of, if it's yogic, it's kind of releasing that kundalini energy. Stage 2 is just explode, scream, cry, let go, yell, do anything, just let everything go. Stage 3 was, they call it the hu stage. So every time you jump up and down, every time you hit the ground, you go hu, hu, hu. So again, that's just like expelling. A lot of it is obviously there's that breath work there, and you're expelling a lot of CO2, and you're kind of probably, again, that hyperventilation is oxygenating the blood, and you're just kind of probably feeling really woozy. And then stage 4 is silence. And in that silence, I'm sure people experience some feelings. Again, you've been hyperventilating, you've been, energizing your body, and then all of a sudden you lie down, and it's I'm not discrediting this at all. These are real feelings that people have, but it's a vulnerable state. You're already experiencing things, and I'm sure that they're telling you different things at this point. And I'm pretty sure that in some of the, like, especially that stage 2 there, the exploding, I think some people have like attacked each other in history. So that's not so great. But, I can see, you're going to be potentially confronted with some emotions going through that. So dynamic meditation indeed kind of seems okay, right? These are the kind of, not bad, pretty intriguing to me anyway, at the beginning at least. So I'll introduce you to a couple central characters that are going to come up throughout the episode. So Swami Prem Narain, who was the legal counselor for the Bhagwan. He very, very interesting character. He kind of, he's one of those. I don't know. I don't know how classic you want to say it, but he's kind of one of those characters that is that quintessential, used to be big, intense, high-powered lawyer into the whole power dynamic and all that hierarchy shit, and went away to India and became, joined a cult. So really interesting. His name used to be Peter Tokels. I don't want to dead name anybody or anything, but his name is now Swami Prem Naren. A lot of people it seemed like almost everyone who joined the Rajneeshi changed their name. Again, very interesting character, very emotionally expressive. In the documentary, he's obviously getting older, but really interesting, clear, concise thinking. But cries a lot and stuff. But again, he's in touch with his emotions. I think spending this time in this cult for a while and what they did and the freeness of it, I'm sure has a lasting effect. And I know he probably continues to live his life in that certain way. And again, the whole idea is kind of just getting away from repression, getting away. And I think that, especially for myself anyway, growing up in like a Catholic specifically, but just Christian environment, there's a lot of guilt involved with religion. And, it's kind of a shame. It's literally a shame. And it's too bad that it was meant to kind of keep people down and, for population control and making sure all these friggin' savages didn't kill each other. But in today's day and age, again, there's a lot more to life, I think, than, life is a lot. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. There's a lot more to life to live, than the Catholics kind of like allow you to, I guess. I don't know what I'm saying. But yeah, it's just so repressive that you don't really get to experience everything. And let's be real, everyone still fucking breaks the rules anyway, and it just makes it seem that much better or that much more tempting. Bloody friggin' Eve couldn't even resist an apple. Imagine if it was like a jalapeno popper or something in that tree. But anyway, back to Swami Prem. Again, former high-powered lawyer in LA. He represented the Lakers, Linda Ronstadt, Sean Cassidy. Essentially, he burned out, it seems. It seems like he was living, eating like crazy, drinking like crazy, just getting out of control. And he turned to the Rajneesh. He went to India. This is still, I guess at this point for him would have been like the mid 70s. And this was still, while the original ashram was in Pune in India. Another character is Jane Stork, otherwise known as Ma Shanti B. She was married with a child. She was kind of disillusioned by marriage. She kind of felt like she was like rushed into it and young and blah blah blah. Had issues. Felt like she bottled everything up inside. And she turned to the Rajneesh because, again, she went to one of these dynamic meditation sessions, and that whole exploding thing was kind of the perfect antidote to, how she was living and feeling bottled up so much inside. And she essentially kind of like left her family to join the Rajneesh. Again, a lot of these characters are kind of very, very stereotypical. And then Sheila, who grew up in India as well and had known the Bhagwan more or less her whole life, became the Bhagwan's secretary, which was like a lot more involved than just like a secretary. She basically ran the entire commune, and she was essentially the face of the Rajneesh, especially when Bhagwan took a vow of silence. For a majority of his time, the Bhagwan was actually silent, and he didn't speak in public. He would only talk to Sheila, and then Sheila would kind of transmit everything. So right away, you're kind of like, okay, there's a little bit of a gap there. There's a lot of power there. Maybe Sheila's kind of keeping things to herself. Maybe she's adding a couple things here and there. Who knows, right? She used to go to university in New York City, and she was married to an American man. and he actually joined the Rajneesh with her eventually, and passed away before she kind of like took over the show anyway. Essentially, Bhagwan saw his idea of this commune as a new experiment, and the whole idea and all the tenets that they created started to kind of attract Westerners. Like I said, that stereotypical Westerner leaving their life, going to India, joining a cult, doing that thing. And essentially, they started growing too large, and the government of India wasn't kind of happy with what was going on. And there were some doings going on there that they weren't stoked about. And essentially they needed a new place for the ashram and the community, and this whole new plan of creating this whole new community. So Sheila actually came up with the idea to go to the USA. Again, she knew about the United States Constitution and thought that would be the perfect place. There's obviously lots of land, blah blah blah. They ended up going and purchasing the Big Muddy Ranch in Oregon, in rural Oregon, which is about 70,000 acres, which is about the size of Manhattan. Probably on the cheap. It doesn't sound like it was really good land. It was kind of scrub land. It was just outside the town of Antelope, Oregon, which at the time had a population of about 40 people. So pretty tiny little town. But again, tiny little town. And when the Bhagwan did decide to go to the States inevitably, they kind of just dipped on everyone in India. They didn't really tell anyone, so a lot of those people that were there to see came to India and left their family. Again, this is like the late 70s. It's hard to guarantee. He just fucking dipset, and then all of a sudden everyone's stuck until they found out that he was going to America. So thousands of sannyasins were planning on moving to Oregon to follow the Bhagwan. And essentially, on this plot of land, their idea was to build a shrine for the Bhagwan while he was still alive. So they had this land, they bought it, and they're slowly starting to come. The people in the town are starting to notice people, but, they're happy. Someone bought the land. They're coming. They were told that, they just want to farm and they just want to, practice their religion and do their thing. I don't know how much was talked about how many people were coming, but here we are. So based on the U.S. Constitution and the right to incorporate as a city, they created the city of Rajneeshpuram in 1981. So started building right around the same time, created infrastructure. They built a giant dam that rerouted the river. They essentially turned like more or less like arid, like desert land, like into like green, lush farmland. There was agriculture. They built all these A-frames. They were in there with huge bulldozers and carving the land up and doing all this crazy shit. And it's like, when you're coming from a life, and probably some of these people, like, I don't know how much Swami Prem Naren was necessarily like having a shovel or whatever, being like officially the legal counsel of Rajneeshpuram. He, like, a lot of people probably came from like white collar jobs. Now all of a sudden they're digging and they're breaking their back and they're working. But it's amazing if you've given up that part of life and you can just go. It's kind of like probably like living like a kid again. Like, you don't have like a real, like, that's a job and it's work, but like you probably don't really have to worry about much money. You're living in this whole thing. It's supposed to be self-sustaining. Everyone's happy. Everyone's together. Everyone's open. Everyone's like basically banging each other. It's like, it's on the surface, it looks amazing, but I guess every cult on the surface looks like that, right? And people who want to like kind of escape their lives, they're now there. And it's amazing what humans can do when they want to work, or when they actually are happy doing their job. And again, they built huge like community centers and temples and like I said, all those A-frame houses. As this was happening, the townspeople of Antelope were becoming concerned. Again, more and more people were coming. As this was happening, obviously they were using parts of the town, because that was, the post office. the cafe, things like that, right? And essentially, they, again, like I mentioned, they were under the impression that the Rajneesh were there to farm and practice their religion and do their thing. When they essentially heard that the plans were to turn Rajneeshpuram into a town of 10,000 people, people started getting very concerned. You know, again, it's a little tiny town, 40 people. All of a sudden, there's a town of 10,000 people next to them. It's basically a big city. And again, it's not just regular folk either, right? You know, again, these are really free-spirited, individualist type people going into a town of 40. And I'm sure, you know, in no way do I mean to cast any dispersions, but if you're from a town of 40 people, you're probably not necessarily, you know, exposed to a lot of things that are outside your town's realm. And if your town is rural, you know, they might be more interested in things that are rural. And again, historically speaking, rural communities have been more conservative, and having these Rajneeshis come into town, it's basically the opposite of that, liberal. And again, if you're living in a town of 40 people in Oregon, you probably are okay with like your space, and you want to have like fucking acres of land to yourself, and you don't want to be bothered, and you want to retire, and you want to just live your life out. And then all of a sudden these people start rolling into town. So again, like I said, we're looking at both sides of things here. We're understanding that these Rajneeshi are coming in, they're trying to create something that's special, and again, they're meeting resistance. So yeah, the mayor of Antelope, Margaret Hill, was unfortunately in the hot seat because it sounded like the way that they elected their mayor was just kind of went down the list. So I guess they got to H that week, and Margaret was in. So, again, she was kind of elected by default, and she kind of had to deal with everything that was happening. The Rajneeshis kind of had a tendency to be untruthful. Again, for example, the whole idea of saying that they were just going to have a farm, and obviously they weren't. I'm not sure exactly if it ever was true that they were just going to chill and farm and be cool, or again, from day one, it was this idea of having this huge city. So, be that as it may, they also considered the residents of Antelope to be really dumb, you know, kind of country bumpkins. So Margaret, as mayor, was kind of dealing with these people, and Sheila and all these leaders that just thought that she was a dumb hick, and it's so not fair, and it's obviously not necessary, and it's obviously not true. But the Rajneesh, and one of the other people in the documentary mentioned, you know, the Rajneesh were educated beyond their intelligence. And I kind of understand that, you know, where it's like you can get, there's a lot of hubris that comes along with intelligence, and a lot of people, based on the way, you know, the Rajneeshi kind of set out their tenets, a lot of people came from education because it was, you know, it was a philosophical, it was a thinking person's religion, really. So at this point, these tensions are building. The townspeople realize, obviously, these people just think we're stupid. So that's going to start creating some, you know, tension right there. They don't like them because they're different and coming from somewhere else, and they feel like they're invading their space and invading their town, and, you know, encroaching on all their shit. And I'm sure if there's like even if there's hundreds of these Rajneesh coming into town, you know, you're doubling, tripling the amount of people that live there in the first place. So, again, tensions are building, and then as the Rajneesh, you know, you want to be able to just do your thing. You want to be able to live your religion and experience life as you please, and you think, oh my God, we found Shangri-La, and now we got to deal with all these peeps. And again, I think as this goes on, I keep mentioning it, you can tell it's just like an escalation, and the tension's just, no one wants to back down at any point, and it's the lengths that this goes to, it's insane. So as these town people are kind of starting to question and wonder and look into who these Rajneesh are a little bit more, there's a documentarian that dropped the documentary Ashram in Pune, which basically gave a behind-the-scenes look at what happened inside the commune. Sheila, the leader, accuses this guy of bringing in a hidden camera, but I've watched the documentary. If you look at the footage, there's no way you could hide a camera. Half the scenes, everyone in the room is naked, so you tell me how you're going to fucking bring a hidden camera in the 70s into a fucking ashram in India. So they knew about it, let's be real. And again, it was just an inside look at that whole dynamic meditation process, and it sounds like I mentioned that letting go stage 2 can be a little violent, especially everyone's naked and doing their thing. And that was caught on film, and it's intense. It's kind of hard to watch. Just seeing kind of a lot of people break down mentally, and again, like I said, that whole process kind of opens you up in a spiritual way. And letters were coming in from concerned family members about the documentary, sending them to Antelope, kind of like stuff like family members trying to reach loved ones who left to join the Rajneesh and saying, listen, my daughter's gone, we can't get a hold of her anymore, I don't know if they've brainwashed her, all this stuff, right? So it's just really concerning things are starting to bubble up, right? And the unfortunate part about this specific case, and any case that really involves cults and serious devotion to certain methods, the question of mental health comes up, and the problem is with these cults is that there's kind of a few different ways to look at it. A friend of mine had a serious mental health crisis, and there was a part of me saying, because of the way he was acting and some of the things he was saying, is there was a part of me saying, go to Tibet, become a monk, learn the ways of meditation, but you're gonna just have to cast off this whole like Western approach and this modern life. You're gonna have to go back and you're gonna have to do all this, but that obviously takes so much effort and so much courage and all this stuff. And I was always tempted to just say that, and I might have even, but there's a lot of people where I find that their thinking and the way that they feel and the way that they are, in day-to-day working and just doing the boring shit that is life, when they're really bogged down in that and they start lashing out, it's obviously considered to be, a form of mental health crisis. And, sometimes you're dealt with being put in the hospital or being put on medication and things like that. And it could be just this reaction to life that you're just not really meant to do it, and you just want to do something else. And that could be another fucking job. It could just, you got to move out, you got to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever it is. Sometimes you have to fucking break some eggs to make an omelet. And that whole idea of sloughing off yourself and going away, that can even be considered, I want to run away from all this, blah, 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 right? So again, mental health can obviously be viewed through different lenses, and we can see different people's behavior, and it can influence us one way or another. I digress. So that whole idea of just going out there and getting into it and diving into the meditative process, I kind of get. It can also be misconstrued with mental health crisis, but whatever. There's a vulnerability, obviously, with mental health that I think some cults can kind of take advantage of. A lot of people that are struggling, they're looking for guidance, they're looking for role models. And obviously there's manipulation from the cult leaders. Let's just say, it's not all on the person that joins the cult. They're probably joining the cult to try and help themselves, for God's sakes, let alone joining a cult where the leader is evil or out to, it's interesting with this. It's interesting in this. There's an attorney in the documentary that mentions the motive for this was evil. I'm sure the motive was this was monetary at the beginning, you know, with all these Westerners coming in, pouring in all this money, and the whole approach of that spiritual materialism. It allowed the Bhagwan to buy Rolls Royces and diamonds and all this shit. So even if it was just monetarily, you know, motivated, that's one thing. And then there's the sex and all this stuff too. So there's a lot of rumors that the Bhagwan himself was engaging in a lot of these sexual acts. Obviously, he had to tell people about it. So I guess so. Anywho, another kind of red flag / issue that both sides were kind of caught over was Shannon Ryan, and she was actually the daughter of Congressman Leo Ryan. Leo Ryan was actually a congressman who was shot just before the Jonestown massacre. So Jonestown, which I'll probably do a separate podcast on, actually, is a crazy story, another cult thing, crazy cult leader, and I think 900 people ended up dying. A bunch of people committed suicide. A lot of people were killed. It's just crazy story. Very interesting. Happened in Ghana, down in South America. Super cool story. Sorry, not events, terrible events, but really interesting story. And the daughter of this congressman who went down to check out the happenings and ended up getting shot on the fucking runway trying to leave, she actually joined the Rajneeshi. And again, you know, you've lost your father, amazing trauma. You're seeking other things. And maybe this was helping, and maybe this was helping. I'm not saying anything against it, but there's just that connection we're making here. Shannon obviously advocated for the fact that Rajneesh were nothing like those of Jonestown. But the problem was Jonestown had only happened several years before. People knew about it. Anytime you brought up cults, that was basically what you brought up. Jim Jones, Jonestown, blah, blah, blah. And many comparisons were obviously being made. And it's kind of an interesting comparison. You know, Jim Jones was Christian, which was, in fact, more like the townspeople of Antelope than they were than the Rajneesh. And again, it's interesting, you know, the tenets of a cult, one leader, you know, following rules blindly, you know, attending scheduled meetings, giving money, sounds like a lot of organized religions to me too, right? So it's interesting. Pot calling the kettle black, hurling hypocrisies, who knows, whatever you want to call it. It's the other. And I think when people encounter the other, and it's two sides of the same coin, they're confronted with questions, and there's questions that you have to ask yourself that are hard questions. And I think that scares the shit out of people more than anything. And I think that's what people from the unknown, that's what the other brings up in you are these fears and this thought of. And it's a deep down notion that I am you and you are me. We are the same, but I'm not doing anything what you're doing right now. And I don't understand why, because I never even thought of that. / maybe I'm against what you're doing. And that can lead to tension. And obviously, like I said, this whole podcast is all about perspective, and it's all about stepping back and understanding each side and accepting entertaining a thought without accepting it, as I always say. This whole Jonestown comparison was definitely used as a weapon by the townspeople and anti-Rajneesh people. It was definitely used as a weapon to attack the Rajneesh. One of the main kind of figureheads, I should say, of the townspeople was Bill Bowerman, actually of Nike fame. He was the track coach at Oregon, and he was the first guy to make the waffle sole for Nike. So him and Phil Knight eventually figured out Nike. So basically, Bill Bowerman was like the fucking king in Antelope, and Oregon for that matter. I think he was originally from Antelope, or at least like the county, Wasco County. And he got involved with the Thousand Friends of Oregon, which was like I I don't know if it's fucking white supremacy shit or anything, because there's like some weird shit like that. But cut that. Cut that. But anyway, he got involved with the Thousand Friends of Oregon, which was basically an advocacy group, and who was kind of involved with like land use shit, you know, dealing with, you know, disputes over like whose property's whose, and, you know, where this fence should go and shit. Anyway, along with Bill Bowerman, they denied the Rajneeshis from essentially creating their town and opening businesses in their town, like in the town of Rajneeshpuram. And so what happened was they started buying up property and local businesses in Antelope, because again, they didn't have these facilities in Rajneeshpuram, and in fact, they weren't even allowed to build them. So you kind of want to ask yourself, if you allowed them to build what they wanted and conduct their business as they liked, would they have bought these properties? And again, a lot of these people were happy to sell their properties. You know, a lot of them have been for sale for years, and, you know, all of a sudden they take 50 grand for a house that's worth 20, and you're like, let's get the hell out of here. So again, little things, you know, it's funny how these things start to boil over. Little slowly but surely, incremental changes, right? So the townspeople really didn't want them there, and the Rajneesh could sense that tension, and, you know, the people of Antelope were walking around with shotguns and weird shit like that, and then the Rajneesh started essentially harassing the people of Antelope. They would walk around and film people and just like did shit to like make people uncomfortable. Again, that was these are some of the dark sides of the Rajneesh, is that when they wanted something, they had these techniques. It was almost like an evil Scientology, where it was like you just like force yourself into situations and just do it, and people shouldn't get in your way. You should just be able to, you know, force yourself into situations and be assertive. And again, the townspeople of Antelope felt that they were being harassed, and with all this property being bought up and everything, they didn't really know what else to do. So they actually came up with the idea to disincorporate as a town to stop the Rajneesh. So if they thought if they're no longer a town, and they're therefore, like, I guess the state would be looking over the area, the state would have more power to stop them, I guess was part of that idea. They don't really explain it so much in the documentary. But unfortunately it fails. At that point, the Rajneesh tried to take or eventually own so much property, they do kind of take over the town. They rename it Rajneeshpuram, and, you know, the people of Antelope at the time just have to kind of grin and bear it, sadly. So essentially, after they had taken over the town, the people were really afraid that they were going to take over the rest of the state. So this was, by this point, starting to spread. It was in, you know, statewide news, maybe even national coverage at this point. So 3 years in, June 1983, Hotel Rajneesh, which was in Portland, was bombed. Some of my research says it was bombed by like some random Islamic group or something, but this kind of led to the Rajneeshpuram creating this peace force, which was like more or less their police force. It started them to start using automatic weapons. So they started ordering rifles. They started training with them. They started every morning. They would practice and shoot and aim and work on their accuracy and all that stuff. And again, one more escalation of force, essentially. And if you're the townspeople of Antelope, now all of a sudden these people have guns. You're going, well, what the hell? These people have a small army that they can easily take us over by force if they ever wanted to. I really believe that all this tension inevitably led to the ultimate violence and action that's taken by the Rajneesh eventually. Like I said, you know, that escalation of force idea, you know, each side felt that they had a right to do what they were doing. You know, it's that whole idea that we were here first. This is what we're going to do. You guys are different. Get out of here. And then for the townspeople, and then the Rajneesh are going, listen, we have the rights. It's in the Constitution that we can do all this stuff. Nothing's illegal. Swami Prem Naren said everything's cool. So it's really trippy. In fact, potentially, like I mentioned, would the Rajneesh have come into Antelope and had to take everything over if they just let the Rajneeshi start their town and do everything that they wanted to, right? So it's an interesting question. At this point, Sheila really started to become the public face of the Rajneesh. Again, the Bhagwan was silent publicly. He didn't talk. He didn't speak publicly. She's a very, very arrogant character. Really, really, really fascinating character. You could see she was trying to protect the commune at first, but I think the power and everything she felt, and like I said, when she was speaking for the Bhagwan, people were listening to her as if she was, and I think I think she mistook that as people actually love her, when it was people obviously love and have feeling and have those feelings towards the Bhagwan, because of his teachings. She wanted to make the Bhagwan happy, I think, at the end, but she wanted to do that so badly that she thought everything was a means to an end, and you know, that's always a tough scenario. Also, the more controversial she was, the more books and more attention she was bringing to the actual religion itself. So all these things, again, just keeps compacting, just keeps escalating. It just all keeps adding to inevitability. And like I said, all that controversy was leading to a lot of sales, because Rajneesh International was worth $19 million, Rajneesh Investment Corp was worth $31 million, and the commune itself was worth $15 million in assets. So they're doing well, I'm telling you. And when the Rajneeshis took over Antelope, and they had their city council, and they actually elected one local resident, who was from there, to join the city council. His name was John Silvertooth, and this guy's super cool guy. He's kind of throughout the documentary. He's really interesting and really talks about, the kind of nitty gritty, because he essentially became like a bit of a spy, and his whole thing was like, you learn a lot more from being nice. So he just kind of sat and listened and let them kind of do their thing, and they probably started forgetting about him. He was just kind of one of those mild-mannered dudes, but he was with it. Again, this is what happens when these Rajneesh underestimate these people's intelligence. They start getting fucked over. So again, the Rajneesh took over the town legally. There was no legal precedent to stop them from what they were doing. They eventually turned a public park into an area for nude sunbathing. Basically had loud open sex so everyone could hear, and more or less in other people's face. And I feel, again, when you're kind of potentially around someone who doesn't feel the same way that you do, so in this case the Rajneesh, very open sexually, when you're around these townspeople of Antelope, extremely conservative, not really down with having sex in the middle of the street. I mean, who is? But there's this thing where I feel some people kind of go, well, you don't want me to do this? I'm going to do this even more. And it goes both ways. I feel like the townspeople of Antelope were like, you don't want me to hate you? I'm going to hate you even more, because I don't want to know anything about you. So, but obviously the townsfolk of Antelope were definitely getting the raw end of the stick here, so to speak. And again, I think the hypersexuality, the people of Rajneesh Puram understood how much that fucked with the people of Antelope. So I think that, again, that's why it was so blatant. So again, at this point, the townspeople are losing it. They're emotionally, morally, ethically just battered at this point. One day, John Silvertooth was actually at the dump just throwing something out, and he noticed a poster that the Rajneesh had thrown out there. And he goes, oh, that'd be cool. I'm going to go grab it. It looks in good shape. And he goes and checks it out. And he starts, like, noticing a shit ton of, like, highly incriminating documents. A bunch of stuff that was, like, supposed to be shredded, or stuff about arranged marriages, regarding immigration, like filtering mail, like going through people's mail, not allowing shit to go out. And this is like townspeople of Antelope too, obviously, right? They're running the whole town. Plans for how they would combat the townspeople, protecting the Bhagwan at any cost, things like this. And a lot of the documents, like I mentioned, said shred this, destroy after reading, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, weren't shredded. They were thrown out. But again, this is the hubris coming from the Rajneesh going, who cares? No one's going to look through the dump. These dumb yokels, blah, blah, blah. I think, again, they completely underestimated people. And there's so much ego behind the Rajneesh. Again, they just thought that they had everything figured out. And it's sad that when you have everything figured out, you would act arrogantly or not try. I don't know. It's interesting. But maybe they did try and share their knowledge, and then the people of Antelope stonewalled them, and then what are you going to do? You can't just keep fucking yelling at a wall. So, got to look at it both ways, people. So, essentially, the Rajneesh had a big leak, and they didn't even know it. So, at this point, the original residents of Antelope, along with, I guess, the 1,000 Friends of Oregon and all those people and the Bowermans, approached Attorney General Dave Frohmeyer. And he was asked to come in, and he took an interest in the case because he was actually family friends with the Bowermans. He was from rural Oregon, and they used to hang out together and grow up, and they all grew up together. So obviously he had a little potential bias there. I don't know if that's conflict of interest, but what can you do? And then essentially once the state steps in and they get their teeth on that bone, they're not letting go. Essentially Rajneesh Puram's strongest legal challenge was the suit launched by the Attorney General claiming the city violated the constitutional separation of church and state, which is pretty strong legs to stand on because, they had religion. Religion was essentially exercising the power of government. That police force thing, they had access to all this background information and the police database and all that stuff. Schools, you couldn't necessarily consider them public because they were kind of teaching religion. They were wearing like religious garb, things like that. It's encroaching on those kind of rights, right? So it's interesting. The thing is that Swami Prem Naren is a very good lawyer. And when you listen to him in the documentary, he's a very, very convincing guy. And he said, the Constitution is interesting. Basically, it's the freedom of religion versus avoiding an establishment. They're two sides of the same coin. You have the freedom to start a religion, but you can't allow that to encroach on the establishment. You can't allow that to become the governing body as well. Again, that's what America was essentially founded on, was not allowing the church to run the state. So, there are a lot of other cities, that are based on a majority of a certain religion. The Catholics in Boston, Salt Lake City with the Mormons. So there was really no precedent to destroy the town because that's essentially what the Attorney General was going for. He wanted to completely disintegrate the town, where usually an injunction occurs. They just say, "We'll stop." You have to make sure that these things are happening. You make sure the church, make sure the schools are public, do all this stuff. But again, they were more out for blood. Sheila, meanwhile, was becoming the only figure in the commune that spoke to Bhagwan. She had this kind of small group of lieutenants, and she was the only one who would speak to Bhagwan at that point. So it's questionable. It's questionable at best because, again, if you're the only person talking to this guy, who knows if he's even fucking talking? And she could just be coming out saying whatever. So it's questionable. So at this point, people started hearing more about the Rajneesh Param, around the world, all this stuff, right? And all these people started more people, I should say, started flocking to Oregon. And a lot of these people were kind of disenfranchised, and a lot of these people were straight up homeless. And it's amazing what happened in the short term. A lot of these people, again, they were accepted with open arms, and a lot of folks that end up homeless they're there because they don't have family, and they don't have structure, and they don't have people in their lives that do give them that hope and allow them to bounce ideas off of and all that great stuff. So they end up in these situations where it's just harder and harder for people to truly accept who they are and embrace them with open arms. But that's what the Rajneesh were all about. So if you're a person who's missing that, this is going to be a great thing for you. Again, in the short term, not everything here is necessarily a complete cure, but it's going to get you in the right mindset to keep going. But there's still something missing. The commune essentially doubled in size, like over a couple months. About 6,000 came from all over the states. And the townspeople of Antelope were obviously extremely concerned at this point. There was, almost 10,000 people in town. If they ever wanted to do anything to Antelope, it's over. It's done. They have essentially an army there, and a lot of people are homeless, and they're coming in, and I think a lot of them were like, sleeping on benches and doing shit like that on their way to the commune. So they just were really unhappy. But at this point, it sounded like the Bhagwan demanded that they take over the county. So that Wasco County, like I mentioned. Now, Bhagwan demanded. It's interesting. Was this Sheila's idea? Who knows, right? Who knows? But apparently the Bhagwan wanted 3 seats on the council after the next election, and they just wanted to own the again. But if from the outside looking in, you're going, well, now you took over the town, now you want to run the county? Like, what the fuck is this? So is maybe those fears of them taking over the state were completely true, and like, who knows, right? Obviously, this was viewed by the county and the state as a real threat, because the county had very few residents, obviously, versus the Rajneesh, like I just said. As long as you are a citizen of the U.S. government, as long as you're a citizen of the U.S., you can vote in the election. So that was probably the biggest factor, and who knows how much that was planned out by Sheila, because essentially this election coming up, now all of a sudden they have all these new people who can vote in their favor. Wild, right? So Wasco County made the extremely controversial decision to suspend all voting rights to new voters. They had the right to be like, this is nefarious, we don't think this is right, so they suspended all the new voters. So now essentially there was all these homeless people on the ranch, and they started kind of getting unruly. One person attacked Sheila and almost killed her, and they essentially just like drugged him and took him out and left him in like an adjacent county town, like 20 miles away or some shit. Just left him on a bench, which is great. Now what the fuck? Anyway, so essentially the commune decided, I don't know if this was Sheila, who knows, but they decided to drug the entire population of the commune with this sedative, Halidol. So they basically drugged all these people completely against their knowledge, against their will. And with the rejection of the voters, the Rajneesh and Sheila basically had to take things to the next level, because they still wanted to run the county and not have to deal with all these townspeople anymore, and just have their... Because again, I feel like the townspeople were at bay unless they kept coming, but they legally took over the town. Like, they had all this precedence. Like, you're good. Like, why don't you just chill? But now you're taking over the county. You're doing these things that are escalating. By this time, Wasco County was starting to conduct their assessment of the ranch property, because they had to determine what was going on there. They had to do their own findings. And that's when they were looking around, checking out the schools and noticing, obviously, there's not a separation here, blah, blah, blah. They're trying to determine, but that's when they first discovered the Rajneesh's lab. So this one's wild. So it turned out the Rajneesh poisoned over 750 people in the Dalles, which is a nearby city in Oregon. They were essentially going around to buffet type restaurants, and they had this apparatus that they basically had this poison. It could come out your sleeve, and they would put salmonella on all this food. So mad people got like really sick, and Jim Weaver led the investigation that inevitably led to the implication of the Rajneesh. He was pilloried and questioned, and everyone thought he was crazy because there was no proof, and he knew he had no proof, and he said he has no proof. But eventually, the county did discover that these people were being poisoned, and that was coming from the Rajneesh. Inside the commune, there was kind of this, while this was happening, the fucking life and times of the commune, there was this new group of wealthy Hollywood types that were kind of infiltrating the Bhagwan's inner circle. And Sheila was kind of slowly being pushed out, and she was no happy about this. You could tell she was getting jealous. And again, all these ego things and all this stuff, it just keeps, as a person, I'm not sure if this religion potentially feeds the ego, which is maybe an issue, and maybe that's a whole other conversation to have and a whole other idea to follow. But that whole, giving into pleasure, all those things, there's, I don't know how much discipline necessarily is involved, but does that just feed the ego? And then she's being loved by all these people on behalf of Bhagwan and living vicariously through him. And again, things are just becoming more and more inflated. And with this jealousy on top of everything, my God. So the state obviously at this point is still after the commune, and they claimed since the Bhagwan wasn't speaking publicly that he wasn't fulfilling his religious duties. So that was one of their biggest kind of ins that they went into. And then they also they also claimed that the Bhagwan was using arranged marriages to bring in new people to the commune, which at that point was essentially the largest immigration fraud case in history. So what they would do is they would take members of the commune and they would marry them to new immigrants coming in, and that would get them their green card and all that shit. And then, one of the tenets of the Rajneesh are not to get married. And then all of a sudden there's all these marriages going on. So again, the cracks are starting to show. Sheila essentially had decided to kill U.S. Attorney Charles Turner at the time, who was representing the state, obviously, at the time. Jane Stork was chosen to take the shot. Every plan was made. They had the gun. They had everything set. But thankfully, Turner didn't show up, so she didn't actually kill anyone. Thankfully. But unfortunately, she went down hard for that plan later. But I'll get into that more. More and more info was obviously coming out about the Bhagwan. He was doing the same thing. Essentially, it came out, there was this investigative reporter, and he was doing some of his own work and checking things out. And he essentially discovered that Bhagwan was doing the same thing in India. So it's like, does this guy just, remember I mentioned the Indian government was kind of not happy about some doings? Was that the doings? Was he, being greasy? And, who knows, right? So very, very, very interesting. So maybe that's why he fled to the U.S. and didn't tell anyone when he left to come from India to Oregon too, right? Maybe that had something to do with it. Sheila and the Rajneesh continued to poison people. They were sending out poison chocolates. They gave this dude some water that almost killed him. It's just craziness. She also wiretapped the Bhagwan and actually everyone who entered the commune. So it became one of the biggest wiretapping cases of all time. Like, she was tapping federal agents and all this shit. She learned the Bhagwan wanted to essentially kill himself in like a dignified way. So she learned that through the wiretapping. And Sheila decided to actually have Jane Stork kill the Bhagwan's doctor. Jane Stork actually volunteered to do it. And she was going to kill the Bhagwan's doctor to prevent him from killing the Bhagwan. They failed. They actually injected him, but the doctor didn't die. He kind of knew what was happening, and they saved him. Sheila and her lieutenants actually all fled the ranch more or less overnight after all this happened, including Jane Stork. They all fucking dipset to Germany. And at this point, the Bhagwan chose to break his silence to address what Sheila did, which was interesting. Maybe he should never done it. It was probably a mistake. But he basically accused her of everything. He put everything on her, and it was almost like, is he just like dumping all this stuff on her because now she's gone? He can now say this? Really interesting. He kind of acted like he didn't know anything and pinned everything on her, which that opened the doors to the FBI because of all these accusations. They're like, well, we got to come in and we got to step in here. So essentially they found out about all the crimes, the poisoning, the wiretaps, the assassination attempts, the immigration fraud, and they eventually wore Bhagwan down. And obviously Swami Prem Naren was still his legal counsel, but Bhagwan apparently went around him and confessed to some lesser crimes to avoid some of the more severe charges. And even with all this, he still decided to get on a plane and try to fucking escape. They got on a plane, they started flying around, fucking jets scrambled, they caught him. They caught him instantly, man. Like, it's like the fucking 80s, bro. It's not whatever. You can't just get in a plane. So he got booked in the air. They took him down. The U.S. Marshals were basically able to arrest him fairly easily. He didn't really put up a huge fight. Sheila and Jane Stork were arrested by Interpol and German police, and they were handed over to American authorities. Like I said, Swami Prem Naren was still Bhagwan's legal counsel and still looking after him. And, you know, it's an interesting story. I do encourage everyone to obviously watch the documentary. There's some really interesting, again, just to see Swami Prem Naren, really. To me, he's kind of one of the stars of the documentary. He just has an interesting way about him. So they ended up working out a deal for extradition, and the Bhagwan spent some time in prison. Sheila went to prison. I think Bhagwan only spent a couple months in prison, but it wasn't good on him. Sheila went to prison. She was sentenced to 20, but she was paroled after 39 months. Jane Stork spent 10 years in prison. They're all out now, living their life. And Bhagwan eventually went back to India and changed his name to Osho. And there's some really interesting books out there written by Osho and all that stuff. Again, he's very frail. He ended up passing away in 1990, so not very much longer after all these things went down. And, you know, people are continuing to follow his teachings, and it's interesting with all this information about him, and, you know, whether or not he knew about all this stuff, whether or not he was the absolute mastermind, who knows, or whether he was just surrounded by people. And it's the unfortunate thing about having the wrong people surrounding someone who's really special. But he could also been an evil genius as well. So but even if he was, can we separate his ideals? You know, can we separate the man from his ideologies? And I think that, you know, it's kind of the question I've raised too about artists. You know, if they're horrible people, does that affect the art that they create? And I mean, potentially it affects how we perceive it and we understand it, we see it through somewhat of a different lens. But also I think that, you know, there are some ideas, especially spirituality and art, that, you know, they come from another place. And I think that sometimes people are just channels, and, you know, whether they've did bad things in their life, you know, it doesn't affect that finished product. It's a tough ethical situation, right? So can we? I guess I'll just leave us with that question. Can you separate the man from the ideology? I don't know. And, you know, why can't religion and politics coexist? Because I think that's really the nitty gritty, kind of coming to conclusion here. Why can't religion and politics coexist? There's probably one point in history where everyone was following the same religion. It was probably easy to have everything, go down. No one's making any fucking bold claims. But, as time goes on and people get away from organized religion, it needs to be separated. And there has to be kind of this logical, cold, calculated kind of decision making when it comes to certain politics too. But you're also dealing with mass people, and again, it's almost like Swami Prem said with the Constitution, it's almost like two sides to the same coin, right? I think at the end of the day, I think this was also a case of people just not understanding each other, and I think things got out of hand. And I think, like I mentioned, slowly but surely, things just escalated and got worse, and no one wanted to give an inch, and everyone was taking a mile, and there was tensions, and there was intimidation, and there was things happening. There was real bad, evil shit going on. But I think if these people of Antelope maybe gave the people of Rajneeshpuram more of a chance, and the people of Rajneeshpuram didn't fucking think these people were just dumb shit yokels, and gave them a chance and listened to what maybe they had to say and tried to work together, who knows, maybe they'd have a beautiful Shangri-La that still exists out in Colorado. Maybe they'll still have that beautiful place out in Oregon there, which is now like a Christian camp, which is funny. It's like Camper Buff, if anyone in Ontario knows what the fuck I'm talking about. Anyway, shout out Camper Buff. But anyway, I'd like to just leave us here with a little bit of a quote. You know what? I'll do it after all this shit. Check it out. Check out the Instagram. Check out the Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Hit us up. Donate some money. We need you. The gas is fucking crazy. If you notice, I have a different t-shirt on every episode. If you guys have any t-shirts, XX, send them my way. DM me. I'll send you my address. I'm starting to run out of t-shirts. And hit us up on our Twitter. DM us on our Instagram at the Bigmark Pod, at the Bigmark Podcast. Rate it, like it, tell everyone, subscribe, hit the bell, do all that fun stuff on YouTube. I love you. Like I said, I'm going to leave you with this Osho quote. And again, separate the man from the ideology, people. To be a happy person, one has to drop all comparison. Drop all these stupid ideas of being superior and inferior. You are neither superior nor inferior. You are simply yourself. There exists no one like you, no one with whom you can be compared. Then suddenly you're home. So the guy had some good shit to say, people. Check out the episodes, Netflix, Wild Wild Country. Look at it. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for bearing with me and being with me. Love you all. Talk to you soon. Peace.